recent Mexican examples of violations to women's rights facilitated by gender identity laws. I'm going to talk about this. We have just listened to three amazing Mexican feminists talking about how the notion of gender identity not only does nothing to eliminate violence against women, as every signatory of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights knows, it can even be conducive to it, since the replacement of the category of sex with that of gender identity is facilitating several violations to women's human rights. Jan Maria's presentation is a clear example of how transactivism shamelessly infiltrated the Latin American lesbian feminist movement, violating the right of lesbians to assemble and associate on the basis of their common lesbianism, without including men who claim to have female gender identities. Quote. What happened 11 years ago in Guatemala was a huge wound to the Latin American lesbian feminist movement. It was not collateral damage. It was exactly what was originally intended. Transactivism has a task assigned at birth: eliminating feminism and undermining women's rights. And this is happening all around the world with some striking but not coincidental similarities. As many feminists have warned, self-ID and the inclusion in the category of women of men who claim to have a female gender identity threatens women's rights to political participation on the basis of sex. Women's participation quotas, for example, are special measures designed to increase women's participation in political and public life. And as the Declaration states in its Article 6, when men claiming female gender identities are admitted to them, the purpose of those important measures in achieving equality for women is undermined. In Mexico, we are witnessing right now that those feminists who warned us about it were right all along. In Tlaxcala, since 2019, quote, every person who so wishes may apply for a new birth certificate via an administrative procedure to change their name and their gender in accordance with their self-perceived identity, end of quote. Of course, when this was achieved, LGBTQ groups were delighted. But if a feminist dared to warn about the possible implications and about how it was open to cheating, she was called, yes, that's right, transphobe. During the current electoral campaign for congresses and town councils, Fuerza por México, a political party, wasn't complying with the constitutional gender parity quotas for its candidates in Tlaxcala, as Alicia Elena just told us. There was an excess of 18 male candidates. They were occupying the places of 18 women. The party found a viable and quick solution. They registered those same males as women on the basis of gender self-ID. Other parties complained, but the electoral authorities initially accepted the obvious cheating. I think they were being consistent. If everyone has a right to self-define their gender identity, nobody but oneself can determine their own gender, and gender identity amounts to sex, those candidates could legally contend as women for those positions. The electoral advisors who argued that nobody can put into question a person's self-ID were absolutely right. Only the LGBTQ community wasn't so happy this time. It is a fraud, they said. They are fake transgender. They are falsely identifying as a gender different from the one they had at birth. They are usurping candidacies meant for women. The well-known transactivist Ofelia Pastrana, who waits longingly for the days when women can donate their wombs to carry out their maternal fantasies of autogynephilic men like him, complained about cis people posting as dressing up or registering as trans people. The party leadership claimed they were not fake transgender. As one of them stated, in the trans issue, we have three modalities: transgender, transsexual, and transvestite, and the community issue is very broad. I cannot invade people's privacy and tell them, you are not. I am confident that we did things the right way, end of quote. They certainly did. and they did their homework and studied their lines. A trans ally couldn't have done it better. Somebody from the Mexican network of trans women said, "We do not accept at all those who consider themselves women in that party because we have never seen them in public life showing that identity." End of quote. Jazz Bustamante, someone who self-identifies as a woman and is a transgender candidate for another party, offered a solution. Quote, that civil society organizations in which these collectives usually participate determine, along with the political parties, who is telling the truth before including them in the electoral lists. End of quote. So much for gender self-ID. Finally, just yesterday was announced that the Tlaxcala Electoral Tribunal canceled those candidacies. The problem, they said, was that they initially registered as men and later they changed it and registered as women. It was not spontaneous, they claimed. What they should have done was present themselves as women from the very beginning, so they could comply with gender parity quotas. The problem was that they changed it in the middle of the process. As you can see, Tlaxcala's electoral authorities recognize that any man can pose, dress up, or register, in Pastrana's words, as a woman and occupy candidacies meant for women. That is no problem at all. They only have to be a little more careful so as not to upset trans activists. Maybe ask for their permission first. Something very similar happened in the state of Oaxaca 3 years ago, when 15 men who claimed they were transgender tried to occupy candidacies in order to comply with the gender quotas. The Mushes, a so-called third gender from an indigenous community who now fall under the trans umbrella and whose culture is being appropriated by trans activism and queer theory, complained, and they were heard. Do we see a pattern here? When women speak, nobody listens. They are crazy, they exaggerate, they are transphobes, they are not allowed to defend their rights. But when men speak, they are heard all right. Nobody would have minded if 18 men who claimed to have a feminine gender identity and were approved by Ofelia Pastrana or Jazz Bustamante occupied candidacies meant for women. Men usurping women's places isn't as serious as men usurping other men's places. But feminism is a woman's place, even though men and even some women would prefer it otherwise. Will we allow them to get their way? That is the question. Thank you for your attention.